The closing papers lay scattered across my kitchen table like evidence of my own stupidity. $48,300. That's what my son Marcus had cost me over 5 years, and I just discovered he never intended for me to live in the house I'd helped him buy. As I sat there, hands shaking, listening to him and his wife Tasha plan their perfect new life in my hallway, one thing became crystal clear. I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was just their personal ATM. But this is where my story really begins, not with my heartbreak, but with what I did next. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled around the world. You know what $48,300 looks like when it's gone? It looks like trust crumbling in real time. It looks like your own son standing in your hallway planning a life that doesn't include you while you're sitting 20 feet away signing papers for a house you'll never call home. Let me back up. My name is Evelyn, and I'm 73 years old. For the past 5 years, I thought I was helping my son Marcus build a future. Turns out I was just funding my own exile. It started innocently enough. Marcus came to me in 2019 with those puppy dog eyes he'd perfected as a child. Mom, I found the perfect house. It's got everything. A big backyard for the kids, 3 bedrooms, and there's even a mother-in-law suite. We could all live together just like you always wanted. Just like I always wanted. Those words should have been my first red flag. The only problem is, he continued running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was nervous. We're short on the down payment. We need $20,000, and with my credit, I didn't let him finish. $20,000. My retirement savings. Money I'd been careful with my whole life. Money I'd planned to use for my own security. But when your only child looks at you with hope in his eyes and talks about family and togetherness, what do? You write the check. That's what you do. Of course, sweetheart, I heard myself saying. We're family. That's what family does. Marcus's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, Mom, you're amazing. This is going to be perfect. We'll take care of you, I promise. No more living alone. No more worrying about anything. We'll all be together. Together. I clung to that word like a lifeline. The house was beautiful, a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. Marcus gave me the full tour, his arm around my shoulders, pointing out all the features, like he was a real estate agent selling me a dream. And this, he said, opening a door on the first floor, this could be your room. It's got its own bathroom, see? And look, it opens right onto the garden. You'd love that, wouldn't you? Mom, I did love it. The room was bright and airy with French doors that opened onto a little patio overlooking the backyard where my future grandchildren would play. I could already picture myself there reading in the morning sun, watching Marcus and Tasha's kids grow up just steps away. It's perfect, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. It's absolutely perfect. But $20,000 wasn't enough. It never is it? 3 months after they moved in, Marcus was back at my door. The washing machine had broken. Could I help with the replacement? It was only $800 and they were still getting on their feet. Of course, honey. We can't have you going to the laundromat with a new baby coming. 6 months later, it was the roof. A leak had started during a heavy storm and they needed $3,000 to fix it before it caused real damage. Mom, I wouldn't ask, but if we don't fix this now, it'll cost twice as much later. And with Tasha being pregnant, I wrote another check. Then it was the car. Marcus's old sedan had finally given up and he needed reliable transportation for his new job. Could I co-sign for a loan just to help them get started? It's not like I'm asking for money this time, Mom. I just need someone with good credit to vouch for me. The payments won't be that much and I'll handle everything. I co-signed. Of course I did. The pattern was always the same. Marcus would show up at my little apartment, usually on a Sunday afternoon when he knew I'd be making dinner. He'd compliment my cooking, ask about my health, tell me about his job or Tasha's pregnancy or their plans for the future. Then, casually, almost as an afterthought, he'd mention whatever financial crisis had brought him to my door, and I'd help every single time, because that's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice for our children. We put their needs before our own. We believe them when they promise things will be different next time. The requests became a monthly routine. The electric bill was higher than expected. They needed new tires for the car. The baby needed furniture, and everything was so expensive these days. Tasha had to take unpaid leave from work, and they were struggling to make ends meet. It's just temporary, Mom. Once I get that promotion, once Tasha goes back to work, once things settle down, we'll pay you back everything. I promise. Promises. I collected them like other people collect stamps, carefully storing each one away, believing that somehow they had value. The baby came. A beautiful little girl they named Isabella. I was there for the birth, holding Marcus's hand in the waiting room, crying happy tears when they placed my granddaughter in my arms for the first time. She's perfect, I whispered, studying her tiny face, her perfect little fingers. She's absolutely perfect. She is, Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. And she's going to have the best grandmother in the world. Right, Mom? I visited every week, bringing groceries and gifts and my endless love. I watched Isabella take her first steps in the backyard of the house I'd helped buy. I heard her say her first word, Gamma for Grandma, sitting on the porch I dreamed of calling my own. But I never moved in. Somehow there was always a reason why it wasn't quite the right time. First, Tasha needed the room as a nursery. That made sense. Where else would the baby sleep? Then Tasha's mother, Gloria, started having health problems, and she needed somewhere to stay while she recovered from surgery, just temporarily, of course. You understand, don't you? Mom Gloria doesn't have anyone else, and with the baby, Tasha really needs her mother's help. I understood. I was good at understanding. Gloria's temporary stay stretched from weeks to months. The room that was supposed to be mine became her room, filled with her furniture, her pictures, her life. When I visited, I felt like a guest in the house I'd helped pay for. But I didn't complain. Good mothers don't complain. Good mothers understand that family comes first, even when they're not sure where they fit in the definition of family anymore. The requests for money didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Having Gloria in the house meant more expenses, more food, higher utility bills, prescription medications that weren't fully covered by her insurance. Marcus would apologize as he asked for help, running his hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. I hate doing this, Mom. I know you've already done so much, but we're really struggling here. With 3 adults and the baby, everything costs more than we expected. 3 adults and the baby. I noticed he didn't count me among the adults in the house, even though my money was keeping them afloat. By year 3, I was writing checks almost monthly. Some months it was just 100 or 2, grocery money when Tasha's hours got cut, gas money when prices spiked, co-pays for Isabella's doctor visits. Other months it was bigger, a new water heater, car repairs, credit card payments, when things got really tight. I never said no, not once. My own life got smaller to accommodate their needs. I moved from my nice one-bedroom apartment to a studio to save money. I cut my grocery budget, stopped eating out, avoided buying new clothes. My Social Security check went straight to them, along with chunks of my savings that I told myself I was investing in my family's future. You're amazing, Mom, Marcus would say every time I handed over another check. I don't know what we'd do without you. Really, I don't know how we'll ever repay you. You don't need to repay me, I'd say, because that's what good mothers say. Family takes care of family. But late at night in my cramped studio apartment, I'd sometimes lie awake doing the math. $20,000 for the down payment, $800 for the washing machine, $3,000 for the roof, $5,000 for the car down payment, hundreds more for monthly car payments when Marcus inevitably fell behind, utility bills, grocery money, medical expenses, credit card payments. The numbers added up to more than I wanted to acknowledge. Year 4 brought new challenges. Marcus lost his job at the manufacturing plant when they downsized. The unemployment benefits didn't cover their expenses, and suddenly every visit came with a crisis. Mom, I'm embarrassed to ask, but we're really in trouble here. The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and I just don't have it. If we miss this payment, we could lose the house. The mortgage payment, $1,200, money I didn't really have, but money I couldn't bear not to give. Of course, sweetheart. We can't let that happen. Marcus found another job after 3 months, but it paid less than the old one. The requests for help didn't decrease. If anything, they increased. There was always something, always a crisis, always a reason why they needed just a little more help to get back on their feet. Meanwhile, Gloria settled deeper into my room. She hung pictures on the walls, bought a new comforter, even got a small television for the dresser. When I visited, she'd sometimes forget I was there, making comments about how nice it was to have her own space, how grateful she was that Marcus and Tasha had made room for her in their home. Their home, not our home. Their home. I tried to bring up the subject once, gently, carefully. Marcus, honey, I was wondering, now that your job situation is more stable, do you think we might talk about me moving into the room we discussed? The look that passed between Marcus and Tasha was so quick I almost missed it. Almost. Oh, Mom, Tasha said quickly. Gloria's still recovering from her hip replacement. The doctor says she shouldn't be climbing stairs for at least another 6 months. 6 months. Then it would be something else. Somehow I knew it would always be something else. But I smiled and nodded because good mothers don't push. Good mothers understand that other people's needs sometimes come first. The final year was the hardest. My own expenses were climbing. Medical bills, prescription costs, the kinds of things that happen when you're in your 70s and your body starts betraying you in small ways. But every time I thought about cutting back on what I gave Marcus, I'd see Isabella's smile or hear about some new expense they couldn't handle alone. Marcus had developed a system by then. He'd call first, usually on a Sunday evening when he knew I'd be feeling lonely. Hey, Mom, how was your week? We missed you at dinner last Sunday. We'd chat about safe topics, Isabella's progress in preschool, Tasha's job, the weather. Then inevitably he'd ease into whatever financial crisis had prompted the call. Listen, Mom, I hate to bring this up, but we've run into a little problem. The problems varied, but the solution was always the same. Could I help out just this once? They'd pay me back as soon as things improved. It was just temporary. Everything was always temporary, except for my shrinking bank account and the growing certainty that I'd never live in that house, never sit on that porch, never be the grandmother I dreamed of being. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. Isabella had turned 5 the week before, a milestone birthday I'd celebrated by buying her an expensive dollhouse that took a significant chunk out of my grocery budget for the month. I'd watched her face light up as she unwrapped it, listened to her squeals of delight, felt that familiar warmth that came from making my granddaughter happy. But the joy was short-lived. Marcus called that same evening with news that hit me like a physical blow. Mom, we've got great news. Tasha got a promotion at work, a big one. The salary increase is substantial enough that we're finally going to be able to get back on our feet financially. I should have been happy. I was happy. Wasn't this what we'd all been working toward? That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of her. There's more, Marcus continued, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. We've decided to refinance the house. With Tasha's new salary and my steady employment, we can get a much better interest rate. It'll save us hundreds every month. Refinancing. A smart financial move. I waited for him to explain why he was calling me about it. The thing is, Mom, we need to pay some closing costs up front. It's about $3,000, but it'll save us twice that much over the next year alone. I was wondering, $3,000. For closing costs on a refinance that would save them money, they wouldn't need to borrow from me anymore. It made sense. It was an investment in their independence, in the end of their financial struggles, in the beginning of them not needing my help every month. Of course, I heard myself saying, if it's going to help you become self-sufficient, then it's worth it. You're the best mom, really you are. This is it, and after this, we won't need to ask for help anymore. We'll finally be able to stand on our own feet. I wrote the check the next day, $3,000. My last $3,000 as it turned out, because what I didn't know was that this wasn't the last request. There would be one more, and it would be the one that changed everything. 2 weeks later, Marcus called again. The refinancing had hit a snag. The appraisal had come in lower than expected, and they needed to bring more money to closing. Just another $1,500, and then everything would be settled. $1,500 I didn't have. Marcus, honey, I wish I could help, but I'm tapped out. That last 3,000 was pretty much everything I had in savings. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Mom, we really need this refinancing to go through. It's going to save us so much money in the long run, and it's our chance to finally get ahead. Isn't there anything you can do? Maybe you could take out a small loan or put it on a credit card. I'll pay you back as soon as the refinancing is complete. Put it on a credit card. Take out a loan at 73 years old on a fixed income to pay for my son's house refinancing. That would save them money. I don't think that's a good idea, Marcus. At my age, taking on debt. It's not debt, Mom. It's an investment. In us, in our future, in Isabella's future. You want what's best for your granddaughter, don't you? Of course I wanted what was best for Isabella, but something about the conversation felt wrong, manipulative in a way that made my stomach turn. Let me think about it, I said finally. Sure, Mom. But don't think too long, okay? We need to get this money to them by Friday or the whole deal falls through. I spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about the credit card I'd paid off years ago and sworn never to use again, about taking on debt at 73 to pay for a house I'd never live in, owned by people who seemed to view me as a financial resource rather than family. In the end, I did it. I called the credit card company, asked them to increase my credit limit, and charge $1,500 I couldn't afford to a card I'd promised myself I'd never use again. But this time something was different. This time as I handed over the money, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of hollow sadness, a recognition that I'd been participating in my own diminishment for years. Thanks, Mom, Marcus said, taking the check with the casual ease of someone who'd never doubted I'd come through. You're a lifesaver. Really, you are. A lifesaver. That's exactly what I'd been, except somehow in saving their life, I'd been drowning in my own. The refinancing went through. Marcus and Tasha's monthly expenses dropped significantly. Tasha's promotion meant more income. For the first time in 5 years, they were financially stable, maybe even comfortable. I waited for the repayment to start. Surely now that they were doing better, they'd begin to pay back some of what they owed me. Not all of it. I wasn't unrealistic, but some acknowledgement that I'd sacrificed my own financial security for theirs. The repayment never came. Instead, I started hearing about their new purchases. Marcus mentioned a new television they'd bought for the living room. Tasha posted pictures on social media of new furniture, new clothes for Isabella, a weekend getaway they'd taken to celebrate her promotion. They were living the life I'd funded, and I was eating generic cereal for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries and credit card payments. But even then, even with the evidence mounting that I'd been used, I might have continued the pattern. I might have convinced myself that family was family, that sacrifice was love, that good mothers don't keep score, except for what happened next, except for the conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come for my weekly visit with Isabella. I always called first, but this time my call had gone to voicemail, and I'd decided to stop by anyway. I had a key, so Marcus had given it to me years ago in case of emergencies, and I'd used it exactly twice before, both times when no one answered the door despite expecting me. This time I let myself in quietly, planning to call out and announce my presence. But before I could, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Marcus and Tasha talking in the animated way people do when they're excited about something. I can't believe it's finally happening, Tasha was saying. After all these years of struggling, we're actually going to be comfortable. I know, Marcus replied. It feels weird not having to worry about money every month. And with Mom finally backing off with the "when can I move in" hints, things are going to be perfect. I froze in the hallway, one hand still on the doorknob, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt bad about that for a while, Tasha continued. I mean, she did help us a lot with the house, but honestly, I never really wanted her living here permanently. It's hard enough dealing with my mother, and at least she helps with Isabella. Your mom would just be another person to take care of. Another person to take care of. The woman who'd funded their life, who'd sacrificed her own comfort and security for their dreams, was just another burden to them. I know what you mean, Marcus said, and his casual agreement felt like a knife between my shoulder blades. Mom means well, but she can be a lot sometimes, and it's not like we really need her financial help anymore. We're doing fine on our own now, fine on their own. After 5 years and $48,000 of my money, speaking of which, Tasha said, we should probably start looking for a place for your mom to live. Something smaller, more appropriate for someone her age, and closer to her friends so she won't be depending on us for social interaction. That's a good idea, Marcus agreed. Maybe one of those senior living communities. She'd probably be happier around people her own age anyway. A senior living community. They were planning to warehouse me in some facility while they lived in the house I'd helped by sleeping in the room I'd dreamed of calling my own. What about Mom Gloria? Marcus asked. Are you okay with her staying indefinitely? Oh, absolutely, Tasha said quickly. She's so helpful with Isabella and she keeps the house clean. Plus, she contributes to groceries and utilities. It's like having a live-in housekeeper who pays rent. Gloria contributed. Gloria was helpful. Gloria was welcome to stay indefinitely in the room that was supposed to be mine. Perfect, Marcus said. So we'll start looking at places for my mom, maybe start the conversation in a few weeks. We'll have to be gentle about it. You know how she can get emotional about family stuff. Emotional about family stuff. As if my desire to be part of their lives, to live in the house I'd helped purchase, was some kind of character flaw rather than a natural expectation based on 5 years of promises. I stood there in that hallway listening to my son and his wife plan my exile from their lives, and something inside me finally completely broke. Not broke like shattered glass, which can sometimes be pieced back together. Broke like ice in spring, a clean, decisive break that changes the landscape forever. I turned around and walked out of that house as quietly as I'd entered. I got in my car and drove home to my cramped studio apartment where I sat at my small kitchen table and for the first time in 5 years did the math with complete honesty. $48,300. That's what I'd spent on people who saw me as an inconvenience, a financial resource to be tapped when needed and discarded when no longer useful. But as I sat there staring at the numbers I'd finally forced myself to face, I realized something important. I wasn't broken. I was angry, and anger I was about to discover could be a very useful emotion. The closing papers in front of me weren't for their house. They were for my apartment. I was selling it to move into a senior living facility just like they'd planned. Except I wasn't doing it because they'd gently suggested it in a few weeks. I was doing it because I'd finally realized that family isn't about blood or obligation or endless sacrifice. It's about respect, reciprocity, and genuine care for each other's well-being. And based on what I'd heard in that hallway, I hadn't had a family in a very long time. I'd had customers. Well, this customer was about to close her account. As I signed my name on the last document, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, followed by familiar voices. Marcus and Tasha had arrived for what they thought would be another routine request for money. They had no idea they were about to get the shock of their lives, because the woman who had spent 5 years saying yes to everything was about to discover the power of a single, well-timed, completely final no. The knock came exactly 3 minutes after I'd signed the last paper, three sharp raps that I recognized immediately. Marcus's impatient knock, the same one he'd used since childhood when he wanted something and didn't want to wait for it. I folded the closing documents carefully and placed them in the manila envelope the attorney had given me. My hands were steadier than they'd been in months. Funny how clarity can calm the nerves even when you're about to walk into the storm of your life. "Mom, are you in there?" Marcus's voice carried through the thin door of my studio apartment, followed by the sound of a key turning in the lock. Of course he still had his key. Of course he'd use it without waiting for me to answer. I heard them enter, Marcus's heavy footsteps and Tasha's lighter ones, accompanied by the rustle of papers and the kind of urgent whispers that meant they were here for money again. I stayed seated at my small kitchen table, listening to them navigate the cramped space, probably wondering why I hadn't come to greet them like I always did. "Mom," Marcus called again, his voice closer now. "We really need to talk to you about something." "I'm right here," I said calmly, not turning around. Let them come to me for once. Let them see me in my natural habitat, the tiny apartment I'd been forced into by my generosity toward them. Marcus appeared in the doorway to the kitchen area, Tasha close behind him. They both looked stressed, which immediately told me this wasn't a social call. Marcus was wearing his "please help us" expression, the slightly sheepish smile combined with worried eyes that had worked on me for 5 years running. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek in a gesture that felt more automatic than affectionate. "How are you feeling? You look tired." "I'm fine," I replied, studying his face. Had he always looked this calculating when he was preparing to ask for something, or was I just seeing it clearly for the first time? "What brings you by? It's not Sunday." Marcus and Tasha exchanged a look, the same quick, wordless communication I'd witnessed in their hallway. The look that said they'd discussed this visit beforehand, planned their approach, decided who would say what. Well, Marcus began, settling into the chair across from me while Tasha remained standing. "We've got some news. Good news and bad news, actually." I waited, saying nothing. In the past, I would have immediately asked what was wrong, would have started offering solutions before I'd even heard the problem. But something about overhearing their conversation had changed the way I listened to them. Now I heard the setup, the carefully orchestrated presentation designed to make me feel responsible for solving their problems. "The good news is that I'm getting a raise at work," Marcus continued when I didn't respond. "A significant one, actually. 20% increase starting next month." "That's wonderful," I said and meant it. "Congratulations." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mom. We're really excited about it. It means we'll finally be able to start building some real financial security." Financial security. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with 5 years of history. I wondered if he realized the irony of talking about their financial security to the woman who'd sacrificed her own to make it possible. "What's the bad news, Vis?" I asked, though I already knew. There was always bad news. There was always a crisis that required my immediate financial intervention. "Well, oh," Tasha spoke up for the first time, her voice carefully modulated to sound apologetic. "It's really more of a timing issue than bad news exactly." I turned to look at her fully. Tasha was 32 years old, college educated, and perfectly capable of handling her own financial affairs. Yet somehow, every few weeks, she found herself in my apartment asking for money like a teenager who'd overspent her allowance. "The raise doesn't start for another month," she continued, "and we've run into an unexpected expense that we need to handle before then." An unexpected expense. I'd heard those words dozens of times over the past 5 years. Unexpected expenses were their specialty. Car repairs that couldn't wait, medical bills that insurance didn't cover, home improvements that suddenly became urgent, credit card payments that somehow caught them by surprise every single month. What kind of expense? I asked. Marcus shifted in his chair, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture that meant he was about to ask for a significant amount of money. We need to hire movers, he said. Professional movers. We're making some changes to the house, some improvements, and we need to move some furniture around, maybe put some things in storage temporarily. Movers. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of changes? Another look passed between them. Tasha cleared her throat and took over the explanation. Well, as you know, my mother has been such a help with Isabella, and her health has really improved living with us. We've decided to make her stay permanent, which means we need to make some adjustments to accommodate everyone comfortably. Everyone. I noticed again that their definition of everyone didn't seem to include me. What kind of adjustments? I pressed, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. We're converting the spare bedroom into a proper suite for her, Marcus said, avoiding my eyes. You know, making it more like her own space with some built-in storage, maybe a small sitting area. She's done so much for us, and we want her to feel really at home. The spare bedroom, the room that had been promised to me 5 years ago. The room I dreamed of, planned for, furnished in my imagination 100 times over. The room that had been temporarily occupied by Gloria while she recovered from surgery, then from her hip replacement, then from a dozen other ailments that had somehow required years of recovery time. I see, I said quietly, and you need professional movers for this. The furniture is heavy, Tasha explained quickly, and some of it needs to go into storage while we do the work. Plus, we want to do this right, you know, make it really nice for her. Make it really nice for her. Not make it ready for me, the woman who'd funded their ability to own the house in the first place. Make it nice for Gloria, who paid a modest amount toward groceries and utilities while living in the room that should have been mine. How much do the movers cost? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Marcus straightened up, his expression brightening as if my question meant I was already agreeing to help. It's not too bad, really. We got quotes from 3 different companies, and the best one is $1,200. But here's the thing, Mom. With my raise starting next month, we'll be able to pay you back within 6 weeks. Guaranteed. $1,200. Guaranteed payback in 6 weeks. I'd heard similar promises dozens of times before, and the payback had never materialized, not once in 5 years of loans and gifts and temporary help. But this time was different. This time I'd heard them planning to move me into a senior facility while making Gloria's stay permanent. This time I knew exactly what I was being asked to fund, my own exclusion from the family I'd spent years supporting. $1,200, I repeated slowly. I know it sounds like a lot, Marcus said quickly, but like I said with the raise, we'll be able to pay you back fast. And Mom, I promise this is the last time. Once I'm making the higher salary, we won't need to ask for help anymore. The last time. I'd heard that before, too. Every request was supposedly the last one, the final crisis, before they achieved financial independence and stopped needing my assistance. Yet somehow the crises kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. I looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person, this man who could sit in my cramped apartment surrounded by the evidence of my financial sacrifice for his benefit and ask for more money to exclude me from the life I'd helped him build? Had I done this to him? Had my years of saying yes to everything, of never setting boundaries or expectations, taught him that my love was conditional on my usefulness? Had I created this dynamic where he saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected? Mom, Marcus prompted when I didn't respond immediately. What do you think? Can you help us out one more time? One more time. The phrase echoed in my mind, joining all the other one more times I'd heard over the years. One more car payment, one more utility bill, one more medical expense, one more home repair, one more until my savings were gone and my retirement security was destroyed. I reached for the manila envelope containing the closing papers and pulled out a single sheet, My bank statement from the previous month. I'd requested it from the bank that morning, wanting to see the numbers laid out in black and white before this conversation took place. Before I answer, I said, placing the statement on the table between us, I want to show you something. Marcus and Tasha leaned forward, probably expecting to see evidence of my ability to help them once again. Instead, they saw the truth I'd been hiding from myself for years. This is my current bank balance, I said, pointing to the number at the bottom of the page. $1,237. That's everything I have in the world. Marcus frowned, clearly not understanding the significance. Okay, so you're a little tight right now. That's fine, Mom. You don't have to use cash. You could put it on your credit card or maybe take out a small loan. With my raise coming, I can help you pay it back. Put it on my credit card. Take out a loan at 73. Let him help me pay back money I'd borrowed to give to him. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so heartbreaking. Marcus, I said carefully, do you know how much money I've given you over the past 5 years? He shrugged uncomfortably. I don't know, Mom. Some, I guess. But it's not like you've been keeping track, right? Family doesn't keep score. Family doesn't keep score. Another phrase I'd used to justify my endless generosity, my willingness to give without expectation of return. But someone had been keeping score, and it wasn't family. I pulled out another sheet of paper, a handwritten list I'd made that morning, sitting at this same table, forcing myself to remember every check I'd written, every bill I'd paid, every small loan that had never been repaid. Actually, I have been keeping track, I said, sliding the paper across to them. Would you like to know the total? Marcus picked up the list reluctantly, his eyes scanning the dates and amounts I'd recorded. $20,000 for the down payment, $800 for the washing machine, $3,000 for the roof, $1,500 for the car down payment, followed by 18 months of car payments when he had defaulted on the loan I'd co-signed, utility bills, grocery money, medical expenses, credit card payments, to prevent them from defaulting and ruining their credit. The list went on for 2 pages. Tasha read over his shoulder, her face growing pale as the numbers added up. When Marcus reached the bottom of the second page, he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. $48,300, I said before he could speak. That's how much family doesn't keep score. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the paper as if the numbers might change if he looked at them long enough. Tasha had stepped back from the table, her hand pressed to her mouth. I had no idea it was that much, Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. No idea, I repeated. In 5 years of asking for help, you never once wondered what it was costing me to give it. Mom, I moved from a 1-bedroom apartment to this studio to afford your expenses. I continued, the words flowing now like water through a broken dam. I stopped eating out, stopped buying new clothes, stopped doing any of the little things that made life enjoyable. I've been living on generic cereal and canned soup so you could live in the house I helped you buy. Marcus set the list down carefully, his hands shaking slightly. Mom, if you'd known that $48,000 was real money, if you'd known that I'm not a bank with unlimited resources, if you'd known that I'm a 73-year-old woman on a fixed income who is sacrificing her own security for your comfort. That's not fair, Tasha interjected, finding her voice for the first time since seeing the numbers. You offered to help. Every time you offered. We never forced you to give us anything. I turned to look at her fully, this woman who'd been living in the life I'd funded while planning to exclude me from it. You're right, I said. I did offer. Every single time I offered. Do you know why? Neither of them answered. Because every time you came to me with a crisis, you made it sound like the alternative was disaster. The house would be foreclosed. The car would be repossessed. The electricity would be shut off. Isabella wouldn't have what she needed. What mother wouldn't help prevent those disasters? But we really were in trouble those times, Marcus said defensively. It wasn't like we were making it up. Weren't you? I asked. Because I drove by your house last week, Marcus. I saw the new car in the driveway, the one you bought to replace the one I helped you pay for. I saw the landscaping you had done in the backyard, the new patio furniture, the expensive swing set for Isabella. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. I saw Tasha's Facebook posts about your weekend getaway to celebrate her promotion, the one where you stayed at a resort that costs more per night than I spend on groceries in a month. So tell me, Marcus, were you really in financial crisis, or were you just comfortable with the idea that someone else should pay for your necessities so you could afford your luxuries? The words hung in the air like an accusation, which I suppose they were. For 5 years, I'd been subsidizing their lifestyle, allowing them to spend their money on wants while I covered their needs. I'd been their financial safety net, the mother they could count on to catch them every time they fell, and they'd never once asked what it was costing me to be there. Mom, Marcus said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I recognized from childhood. I know this looks bad. I know we should have been more aware of how much we were asking from you, but we can fix this. Starting next month with my raise, we'll start paying you back. We'll make this right. How? I asked simply. What do you mean, how? I mean, how will you pay me back $48,000? Your raise is 20% of your current salary, which I believe is about $40,000 a year. So that's an extra $8,000 annually before taxes. After taxes, you might see an extra $5,000 or $6,000. Are you planning to give me all of that extra income for the next 8 to 10 years? Marcus looked stunned, as if he'd never actually done the math on what payback would require. Or maybe, I continued, you were thinking of smaller payments, $100 a month perhaps. At that rate, you'd pay me back in full sometime around your retirement, assuming you never missed a payment and never asked me for help again. Mom, please, Tasha said, tears forming in her eyes. We know we messed up. We know we took advantage of your generosity, but we're family. Families work through problems together. Are we? I asked quietly. Are we family? The question seemed to surprise them. Of course we are, Marcus said immediately. Mom, what kind of question is that? I stood up slowly, walking to the small window that looked out over the parking lot of my apartment complex. The view wasn't much, just cars and concrete and the dumpster where I threw away my dreams a little more each day. I went to your house last Tuesday, I said without turning around. I was going to surprise Isabella with a book I'd found for her. I let myself in with the key you gave me. I heard Marcus draw in a sharp breath behind me. I heard you talking, I continued, about how relieved you were that I'd stopped hinting about moving in, about how you never really wanted me living there permanently, about how I'd just be another person to take care of. The silence behind me was absolute. I heard you discussing plans to move me into a senior living facility, somewhere more appropriate for someone my age, away from people who might depend on you for social interaction. I heard you talking about making Gloria's stay permanent because she's helpful with Isabella and contributes to household expenses. I turned back to face them. Marcus had gone completely white. Tasha was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streams. So tell me, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest, are we really family, or am I just a financial resource that's become inconvenient now that you don't need it anymore? Mom, that's not, Marcus started. Let me finish, I said firmly. For 5 years, I believed we were building something together. I thought my money was an investment in our shared future, in a life where I'd be part of Isabella's daily routine, where I'd have a real home with people who loved me. I thought I was buying belonging. I walked back to the table and picked up the bank statement. Instead, I bought you a house where I'm not welcome. I funded a life that doesn't include me. I paid $48,000 for the privilege of being planned out of existence. That's not true, Tasha said desperately. We love you. Isabella adores you. You're always welcome in our home. As a visitor, I said. Always as a visitor, never as family. Marcus found his voice again. Mom, I know how that conversation must have sounded, but we were just talking. We weren't making actual plans. We'd never do anything like that without discussing it with you first. Wouldn't you? I asked. The way you discussed making Gloria's stay permanent without consulting me. The way you've made every major decision about the house I helped buy without considering my feelings or my expectations. He had no answer for that. I sat back down at the table and looked at both of them, my son and his wife, the people I'd sacrificed everything to help the family I'd thought I was part of. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. I'm not giving you $1,200 for movers. I'm not giving you money to make Gloria's room more comfortable while you plan my exit from your lives. I'm done being your emergency fund. Mom, please. I'm not finished, but I continued. I'm also done pretending that $48,000 doesn't matter. I'm 73 years old, Marcus. That money was my security, my safety net, my peace of mind, and it's gone. All of it given to people who never once asked what it was costing me to be so generous. Marcus was crying now too, though trying to hide it. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to take advantage of you. But you did take advantage, I said simply. For 5 years you took and took and took, and you never once thought about what you were taking from. You saw my love as weakness and my generosity as an endless resource. You treated me like an ATM with feelings instead of a person with needs. What can we do? Tasha asked through her tears. Tell us what we can do to make this right. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd helped plan my exile while living in the room I'd dreamed of calling my own. Nothing, I said finally. There's nothing you can do. The money is gone, and so is my trust. So is my belief that family means anything more than shared DNA and financial convenience. Don't say that, Marcus pleaded. Please, Mom, we can work this out. We can make changes. You can leave, I said quietly. The words fell between us like stones. What? Marcus asked as if he hadn't heard correctly. I want you to leave. Both of you. I'm tired of being used, and I'm tired of pretending that what we have is love when it's really just financial dependency dressed up with holidays and birthday visits. Mom, you don't mean that. I stood up again and walked to the door, opening it wide. I mean every word. Leave. Find another way to pay for your movers. Find another bank to fund your lifestyle. Find another person to use and discard when they're no longer convenient. Marcus stood slowly, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Mom, if you just give us a chance to explain. 5 years, I said. I gave you 5 years of chances. I gave you $48,000 worth of chances. I gave you every opportunity to treat me like family instead of like a resource. This conversation is your reward for how you chose to use those chances. Tasha had stopped crying and was looking at me with something that might have been anger. Fine, she said, her voice hard. If that's how you want to be, but don't come crawling back to us when you're lonely and need someone to take care of you. The threat was supposed to hurt, I think. It was supposed to make me reconsider to remember my place in the hierarchy they'd established where my needs came last and my money came first. Instead, it clarified everything. I won't be crawling anywhere, I said evenly, and I certainly won't be crawling back to people who see taking care of me as a burden rather than a privilege. Marcus took a step toward me, his hands outstretched in a gesture that looked like supplication. Mom, please, don't end it like this. Give us a chance to do better. I looked at my son, but the baby I'd raised the man I'd sacrificed everything to help. He was still asking for something from me even now, still expecting me to be the one to give, to forgive, to make things easy for him. Your chance was the last 5 years, I said. This is the consequence of how you used it. They left finally after several more minutes of pleading and promises and threats. I watched from my window as they walked to their car, the car I'd helped them buy, and drove away to the house I'd helped them purchase where they'd plan how to exclude me more effectively next time. But as I stood there in my empty apartment, looking at the closing papers still scattered across my kitchen table, I didn't feel the crushing loneliness I'd expected. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. For the first time in 5 years, my money was my own. My decisions were my own. My future was my own to plan without considering who might need what from me next. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you had the choice to jump or walk away. I chose to walk away from the edge I'd been living on for far too long. The phone rang an hour later. Marcus, of course, calling to apologize and explain and ask for just one more chance. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By the time evening came, I had 17 messages on my answering machine, each one more desperate than the last. Some were from Marcus, some from Tasha, and one from Gloria, who apparently had been enlisted to help convince me to change my mind. I deleted them all without listening to them completely. I'd heard enough explanations and apologies and promises to last several lifetimes. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote what I want for the rest of my life. It was a list I'd never made before, a question I'd never asked myself. For 5 years, everything had been about what other people needed from me. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was going to think about what I needed for myself. The list started slowly. A place to live where I felt welcome. Enough money to eat well and pay my bills without anxiety. Friends who enjoyed my company for reasons other than what I could provide for them. Then it grew longer. I wanted to travel even if it was just day trips to places I'd never seen. I wanted to read books without feeling guilty about the time I was spending on myself. I wanted to wake up in the morning without wondering who was going to need something from me before the day was over. I wanted to matter to someone because of who I was, not what I could give them. Most of all, I wanted to stop being afraid. Afraid of saying no, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being abandoned if I wasn't useful enough. I'd lived in fear for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what other people expected. The list filled 3 pages by the time I finished. 3 pages of dreams and hopes and possibilities I'd set aside to fund someone else's life. Looking at those pages, I realized something important. I wasn't too old to start over. I wasn't too poor to build something new. I wasn't too damaged by the betrayal to believe in the possibility of real family, real love, real belonging. But it wouldn't be with Marcus and Tasha. That bridge had been burned by 5 years of taking without giving, of promising without delivering, of planning my exclusion while benefiting from my inclusion. It was time to build new bridges with people who saw my value beyond my bank account. The phone rang again as I was getting ready for bed. This time it was Isabella's voice on the machine, sweet and confused, asking why I hadn't come to see her and when I was coming again. Marcus or Tasha had obviously coached her to call, thinking her innocent voice might succeed where their pleas had failed. That call hurt more than all the others combined. Isabella was genuinely innocent in all this, a child who'd been used as emotional leverage by adults who should have known better. She didn't understand why her grandmother had suddenly disappeared from her life, didn't know about the financial manipulation and broken promises that had led to this moment, but she would understand someday. And when she did, she'd know that I'd loved her enough to refuse to teach her that love was conditional on what you could provide for other people. I hoped that lesson would serve her better than my example had served her father. As I turned off the lights and prepared for my first night of freedom in 5 years, I realized that tomorrow would be the first day of my new life, a life where I mattered, where my needs counted, where my money stayed in my bank account unless I chose to spend it on something that brought me joy. It was going to be a very different kind of life than the one I'd been living, and I couldn't wait to see what it looked like. The morning after changed everything. For the first time in 5 years, I woke up without immediately thinking about who might need money from me that day. The silence in my apartment felt different, not empty but peaceful, clean. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the legal pad from the night before, reading over the 3 pages of dreams I'd written. In daylight, some of them seemed impossibly ambitious for a 73-year-old woman with $1,200 to her name, but others felt not just possible but necessary. The phone had been ringing since 7 a.m. I'd stopped counting the calls after the 15th one. The answering machine was full again, the little red light blinking frantically like a distress signal from a sinking ship. I knew who it was without listening. Marcus and Tasha probably taking shifts, trying different approaches, different emotional angles, different ways to crack the resolve I'd finally found. But I wasn't ready to hear their voices yet. Maybe I never would be. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed in my nicest clothes and went out for breakfast. Not the rushed coffee and stale donut I usually grabbed on the way to whatever crisis Marcus had called me about, but an actual breakfast at the diner 3 blocks from my apartment complex. The waitress was a woman about my age named Dorothy with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'd seen her there before during my rare visits, but we'd never really talked. Today felt different. "You're looking particularly lovely this morning," she said as she poured my coffee. "Special occasion." I thought about that question for a moment. Was it a special occasion, the first day of standing up for myself, the beginning of living for my own needs instead of everyone else's? "You could say that," I replied. "I made some big decisions yesterday." "Good for you," Dorothy said, and something in her voice suggested she knew what it was like to make difficult choices later in life. "The pancakes are especially good today if you're in the mood for celebrating." I ordered the pancakes and orange juice and an extra cup of coffee. When was the last time I'd eaten a meal without calculating what it cost and whether I could afford it after whatever Marcus needed that week? When was the last time I'd done anything purely because it would make me happy? The food tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. While I ate, I watched the other customers. An elderly man reading the newspaper with intense concentration, a middle-aged woman grading papers, probably a teacher getting ready for her day, a young couple sharing a plate of hash browns and looking at each other like they were the only 2 people in the world. All of them looked content in their own space, comfortable with their own company. When had I lost that? When had I become so dependent on being needed that I'd forgotten how to simply exist without serving someone else's agenda? Dorothy stopped by to refill my coffee. "Mind if I ask what kind of decisions you made yesterday? You've got that look about you, like someone who's just figured something important out." I found myself telling her the whole story, not the details about the money. Those numbers were too personal, too painful to share with a stranger. But the shape of it, the years of giving without receiving the discovery that I'd been funding my own exclusion from the family I thought I was supporting. Dorothy listened without interrupting, refilling my coffee cup when it got low, occasionally nodding and understanding. When I finished, she sat down across from me in the booth, something I suspected she wasn't supposed to do during her shift. "How long were you married?" she asked. The question surprised me. 32 years before Harold died." "Why?" "Because you sound like a woman who spent those 32 years taking care of everyone else, and then when your husband passed, your son just stepped into that role." Am I right? She was more right than she knew. Harold had been a good man, but he'd been traditional in his expectations. I'd handled the house, the children, the extended family obligations, the emotional labor that kept everyone happy and connected. When he died, Marcus had seamlessly assumed the position of being the man I served, the person whose needs came before my own. "It's a common story," Dorothy continued. "Women our age, we were raised to believe that our value came from how well we took care of other people. We measured our success by everyone else's happiness, never our own. But yesterday was different," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Yesterday you remembered that you mattered too," Dorothy agreed. "That's a hard lesson to learn at our age, but it's not too late to learn it." She stood up and pulled a business card from her apron pocket. "There's a group that meets at the community center on Thursday evenings. women who've had to start over for various reasons. Some are widows, some are divorced, some just got tired of living for everyone else. You might find it helpful. I took the card reading the simple text, New Beginning Support Group, Thursdays 7 p.m., all welcome. Think about it, Dorothy said, and come back any time you need someone to listen. I'm here most mornings. I walked home slowly, taking a route through the park I'd never noticed before, despite living in the neighborhood for 2 years. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made you glad to be alive. Children were playing on the playground while their mothers chatted on nearby benches. Elderly couples walked hand in hand on the paved paths. Life was happening all around me, ordinary and beautiful and full of possibilities I'd been too distracted to see. The answering machine was still blinking when I got home, but I ignored it. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Evelyn. My old friend Ruth's voice was warm with surprise and delight. How wonderful to hear from you. It's been ages. Ruth and I had been close friends for years, but our relationship had suffered during the period when Marcus's needs consumed all my time and emotional energy. I'd canceled plans to handle his crises, cut phone calls short when he needed to discuss his problems, gradually withdrawn from the friendship as his demands increased. I know it's been too long, I said. I've been dealing with some family issues, but they're resolved now, and I was hoping we could catch up. Maybe have lunch sometime soon. I'd love that, Ruth said immediately. Are you free today? I was just about to make chicken salad, and you know how I always make too much. An hour later, I was sitting in Ruth's sunny kitchen eating homemade chicken salad on fresh croissants and remembering what it felt like to have a conversation that wasn't about money or crisis or what someone needed from me. You look different, Ruth observed as she poured iced tea from a pitcher decorated with painted lemons. Lighter somehow, but also sad. What's going on, Evelyn? I found myself telling the story again this time, including more of the financial details because Ruth was a trusted friend who'd earned the right to know the depth of my situation. She listened with growing anger, her face getting redder as the numbers got higher. $48,000, she said when I finished. Evelyn, that's your entire retirement savings. Was my retirement savings, I corrected. Now it's their house and their car and their comfortable lifestyle. Ruth set down her tea glass with more force than necessary. I could kill that boy. I always thought there was something too smooth about Marcus, too quick with the charm when he wanted something. But this is financial abuse, Evelyn. You know that, right? Financial abuse. I'd never thought of it in those terms, but hearing Ruth say it made something click into place. The constant crises that required immediate financial intervention, the way Marcus had isolated me from friends and activities by creating emergencies that demanded my attention, the gradual erosion of my boundaries until I didn't even question giving away money I couldn't afford to lose. I feel so stupid, I admitted. How could I let it go on for so long? You're not stupid, Ruth said firmly. You're a mother who loved her son and wanted to help him succeed. There's nothing stupid about that. What's stupid is Marcus taking advantage of your love and never considering what it was costing you. And we talked for 3 hours. Ruth told me about her own struggles with her daughter who'd tried similar manipulation tactics before Ruth had learned to set boundaries. She told me about other friends who'd faced similar situations with adult children who couldn't seem to launch successfully into independence. The hardest part, Ruth said, is accepting that helping them doesn't actually help them. Every time you rescue them from the consequences of their poor decisions, you're teaching them that they don't have to learn better decision-making skills. You're enabling their irresponsibility by making it comfortable. By the time I left Ruth's house, I felt less isolated, less ashamed, and more convinced that I'd made the right decision. I wasn't a terrible mother for cutting off the money supply. I was finally being a good mother by forcing my son to grow up and handle his own responsibilities. But that conviction was tested severely when I got home and found Marcus sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. He looked terrible. His hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes red and puffy from crying or lack of sleep or both. When he saw me approaching, he stood up quickly, almost stumbling in his haste. "Mom, thank God," he said, reaching for me. "I've been calling all day. Why haven't you been answering your phone?" I stepped back, maintaining distance between us, because I didn't want to talk to you. The blunt honesty seemed to shock him. In the past, I would have softened the rejection, would have explained that I needed time to think, or that I wasn't ready to discuss things yet. I would have cushioned his feelings while ignoring my own need for space. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking out, "we need to talk. There are things you don't understand, things I need to explain." "What things?" I asked, not moving toward the building entrance. "What could you possibly explain that would change the fact that you've taken $48,000 from me while planning to exclude me from your life?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture. "It's not like that. You're taking everything out of context. That conversation you heard, we were just talking through possibilities. We weren't making actual plans. What context makes it acceptable to discuss warehousing me in a senior facility while making Gloria's stay permanent in the room that was promised to me? We were trying to figure out the best situation for everyone," he said desperately, "including you. Those senior living places have activities and people your age and medical care right there. We thought you might be happier." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. Do you hear yourself right now? You're trying to convince me that planning my exile was actually for my own good. You're trying to make me grateful for being discarded." Marcus's face crumpled. "That's not what we were doing. Mom, I love you. Isabella loves you. We want you in our lives." "As a visitor," I said, "as someone who comes by on Sundays and brings gifts and asks for nothing in return, as someone who's useful when you need money but inconvenient when you need space. That's not fair. Isn't it?" I pulled out my keys but didn't move toward the door. "Marcus, in 5 years of taking my money, how many times did you ask me how I was managing financially? How many times did you wonder if giving you another $1,000 meant I couldn't pay my own bills?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "How many times did you ask what I wanted or needed or hoped for? How many times did you consider my feelings before making decisions about the house I helped buy?" Still no answer. "The truth is, you stopped seeing me as a person years ago. I became a resource to be managed, a solution to be deployed when problems arose. You took my love and my money and my support for granted because I never made you question whether you deserved them. I know I made mistakes," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face now, "but I can change. We can change. Just give us another chance to prove it." "With what?" I asked. "You came here to ask for money for movers. Even after everything we discussed yesterday, even after seeing exactly how much your requests have cost me, you're still here asking for more." Marcus looked stricken. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for forgiveness, for understanding, for the chance to make things right." "How are you going to move Gloria's furniture without the movers you can't afford?" The question caught him off guard. For a moment, his face showed the same calculating expression I'd learned to recognize, the look that meant he was trying to figure out how to get what he needed from me. "We'll figure something out," he said finally. "We'll do it ourselves or ask friends to help or something. The point is, we don't need to take any more money from you. We can handle our own problems." "Can you?" I asked. "Because yesterday you told me this was a crisis that required professional movers and $1,200 you didn't have. Today you're telling me it's something you can handle on your own. Which is it, Marcus? Was yesterday's crisis real, or was it just another way to manipulate money out of me?" He had no answer for that either. "Here's what I think happened," I continued. "I think you and Tasha decided to permanently convert my room for Gloria, but you didn't want to pay for the work yourselves, so you created a story about needing professional movers for furniture that you could probably move with a borrowed truck and a couple of friends. You came to me because you've been trained by 5 years of success to believe that I'd always say yes." Marcus's silence told me I was right. "The crisis wasn't real," I said. "It was manufactured, just like most of them have been, I suspect. real problems that could have been solved other ways, but it was easier to ask Mom for money than to figure out solutions yourselves. Mom, that's not. It is, I said firmly. And the fact that you're still trying to convince me otherwise proves that you still don't understand what you've done wrong. You still think this is about money, about whether you can afford to pay me back, or whether you really need what you're asking for. I finally walked to the building entrance, Marcus following close behind. This isn't about money, I said, turning to face him one last time. This is about respect. This is about whether you see me as a person with my own needs and feelings, or as a resource that exists to make your life easier. Of course I see you as a person, Marcus protested. No, you don't, I said sadly. A person is someone whose feelings you consider before making plans that affect them. A person is someone you check in with not just when you need something, but because you care about their well-being. A person is someone whose financial situation you understand and respect, not someone you assume has unlimited resources for your convenience. I put my key in the lock, but didn't turn it yet. For 5 years, you've treated me like an ATM with emotions. You've pushed the right buttons to get what you needed, then walked away until the next time you had a crisis. You've never once asked what I wanted or needed or hoped for because my wants and needs were irrelevant to your agenda. That's not true, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without needing something? When was the last time you asked about my life, my health, my happiness without it being a prelude to asking for money? Marcus stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. I can't remember either, I said quietly, because it's been years since you saw me as anything other than a means to an end. I turned the key and opened the door, but Marcus grabbed my arm gently. Mom, please. Tell me what I need to do to fix this. Tell me how to make it right. I looked at his face, still young at 35, still handsome despite the tears and the desperate expression. He was my son, the baby I'd carried, and the child I'd raised, and the man I'd loved unconditionally for more than 3 decades. But love without respect isn't really love at all. It's dependency or habit or emotional convenience disguised as affection. You can't fix this with words, Marcus. You can't undo 5 years of taking by promising to be different tomorrow. Trust once broken has to be rebuilt through actions, not apologies. Then let me rebuild it, he said urgently. Tell me what actions you need to see. I thought about that question seriously. What would it take for me to trust Marcus again? What would need to change for me to believe that he saw me as a person rather than a resource? You'd have to go at least a year without asking me for anything, I said finally. No money, no favors, no crisis management. You'd have to prove that you can handle your own life without my intervention. Done, Marcus said immediately. What? Absolutely, starting right now. You'd have to pay me back the $48,000. His face went pale. Mom, I want to, but that's going to take a long time. Maybe if we could work out a payment plan. I'm not talking about a payment plan, I interrupted. I'm talking about you taking responsibility for what you've taken from me. Maybe that means selling the house I helped you buy and moving somewhere you can actually afford. Maybe it means both you and Tasha getting second jobs. Maybe it means making real sacrifices to repair the damage you've done. Marcus looked stricken. We can't sell the house. We have Isabella to think about in her school, and Tasha's mom is settled there. And there it is, I said sadly. Even when you're trying to make amends, your comfort comes first. You want to rebuild trust with me, but not if it requires any real sacrifice from you. That's not fair, Mom. We have responsibilities. So did I said. I had a responsibility to myself, to my own security and well-being, but I ignored those responsibilities to fund your convenience. Now you're telling me that your responsibilities are more important than making amends for the damage you've caused. I stepped into the building but turned back to look at him through the glass door. This is why I can't trust you, Marcus. Because even when you're apologizing, you're still looking for ways to avoid the consequences of your choices. You want forgiveness without restitution, trust without sacrifice, family without responsibility. Marcus pressed his hands against the glass, looking like a child separated from everything he thought he could count on. Mom, don't do this. Don't cut me out of your life. I'm your son. Being my son is a biological fact, I said through the glass. Being my family is a choice you make every day through your actions. For 5 years, you've chosen to treat me like a resource rather than family. I started walking toward the elevator, but I could still hear his voice through the door. I love you, Mom. Despite everything, I love you. I stopped and looked back at him one more time. I love you too, Marcus. That's why this hurts so much, but love isn't enough anymore. Love without respect, love without consideration, love without reciprocity. That's not the kind of love I want in my life. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside. Through the building's front windows, I could see Marcus still standing on the steps, his shoulders shaking with sobs. My heart broke for him, but it didn't break my resolve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors, even when it hurts everyone involved. The elevator carried me up to my floor, away from the son who'd forgotten how to be family, and toward a future I was finally ready to build for myself. Back in my apartment, I ignored the blinking answering machine and called the number on the card Dorothy had given me at the diner. New Beginnings Support Group, a cheerful voice answered. This is Patricia. Hi, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I was given your number by Dorothy at Miller's Diner. I think I need to start over, and I was hoping you could help me figure out how. That's exactly what we're here for, Patricia said warmly. Can you tell me a little bit about your situation? I found myself telling the story for the third time that day, but this time it felt different. This time I wasn't looking for sympathy or validation. This time I was looking for practical advice about how to build a life that belonged entirely to me. You've taken the hardest step already, Patricia said when I finished. You've recognized that you deserve better, and you've set boundaries to protect yourself. Now we just need to help you figure out what comes next. What came next? For the first time in 5 years, that phrase filled me with excitement rather than anxiety. What came next was entirely up to me. The Thursday evening support group meeting changed my perspective on everything. I'd spent the week since my conversation with Patricia alternating between moments of fierce determination and crushing loneliness. The silence from Marcus and Tasha after our confrontation felt both liberating and devastating. I'd gotten what I asked for, space to heal and think, but the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. The community center was a modest building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in a circle. When I walked into the meeting room at exactly 7 p.m., 6 other women were already seated, ranging in age from what looked like early 50s to mid-80s. They all turned to look at me with expressions of understanding rather than curiosity, as if they recognized something familiar in my hesitant posture. You must be Evelyn, Noam, said a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes. I'm Patricia. We spoke on the phone. Patricia introduced me to the group Margaret, who'd divorced her husband of 30 years after discovering he'd been systematically draining their retirement accounts for gambling. Susan, whose adult daughter had been stealing money from her for years to fund a drug addiction. Caroline, who'd spent 2 decades caring for an increasingly demanding and abusive elderly mother before finally placing her in professional care. Janet, whose son had moved back home after college and spent 5 years treating her like a personal ATM and housekeeping service. Rosa, who'd supported her unemployed brother and his family for years before realizing they had no intention of becoming self-sufficient, and Alice, the eldest, at 84, who'd given away most of her inheritance to various family members who'd promptly cut contact once the money was gone. We've all been where you are, Patricia said as I took my seat. We've all learned the hard way that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling disguised as affection. The women shared their stories with a matter-of-factness that came from having told them many times before. What struck me wasn't the similarities in their experiences, though those were numerous, but the difference in how they talked about themselves now compared to how I still talked about my situation. They didn't apologize for setting boundaries. They didn't justify their decisions to stop being taken advantage of. They didn't express guilt about choosing their own well-being over someone else's convenience. When did you stop feeling guilty? I asked Alice, the woman whose inheritance had disappeared into the pockets of ungrateful relatives. When I realized that my guilt was keeping them from learning to take care of themselves, Alice said simply. Every time I rescued them from their poor choices, I was teaching them that they didn't need to make better choices. My guilt was actually hurting them more than helping them. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and I left feeling less alone than I had since the confrontation with Marcus. These women understood the unique pain of being used by people you love. They understood the complicated grief of mourning relationships that had been built on exploitation rather than genuine care. But more importantly, they showed me what recovery looked like. They'd all built new lives centered on their own needs and values. They'd all learned to say no without justification. They'd all discovered that self-respect was more valuable than being needed by people who didn't respect them. I drove home from the meeting feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, hope for my own future. That hope was tested the next morning when I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written on it in Marcus's familiar handwriting, and inside was a letter that made my hands shake as I read it. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know you said you didn't want to hear from me, but I had to write this letter. I've been thinking about everything you said, and I finally understand how badly I've hurt you. You were right about everything. The money, the manipulation, the way I stopped seeing you as a person. I'm ashamed of who I became, and I'm committed to being better." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his newfound understanding of his behavior and his promises to change. He acknowledged the $48,000 he owed me and proposed a payment plan that would pay me back over 10 years. He promised to never ask for money again, to include me in family decisions, to treat me with the respect I deserved. It was everything I'd wanted to hear for 5 years. It was also exactly what the women in the support group had warned me about. The hardest part, Susan had said during the meeting, is when they finally give you all the words you've been waiting to hear. They apologize beautifully, they acknowledge everything they did wrong, they promise to change, and part of you wants to believe it so badly that you ignore the fact that words are easy, behavior is hard. I read Marcus's letter 3 times, looking for evidence that he truly understood what he'd done wrong. The acknowledgement was there, the apologies were heartfelt, the promises were specific and detailed. But something was missing. There was no indication that he'd already started changing his behavior, no mention of steps he'd already taken to become more self-sufficient or to reduce his dependence on other people's money, no evidence that his understanding had translated into action. The letter was beautiful and probably sincere, but it was still just words. I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer, then went about my day as if I'd never received it. But the letter had stirred up emotions I'd been trying to manage, and by evening I was feeling raw and uncertain again. That's when Tasha showed up. I was making dinner, to a simple meal of soup and salad that I was actually enjoying instead of rushing through, when I heard a soft knock at my door. Not Marcus's impatient pounding, but a gentle, almost apologetic sound. Through the peephole I saw Tasha standing alone in the hallway, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual polished work attire, and her eyes were red from crying. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Evelyn," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "thank you for opening the door. I wasn't sure you would." I didn't invite her in, but I didn't close the door either. "What do you want, Tasha?" "I want to apologize," she said simply. "Not because Marcus asked me to, not because we need something from you, but because I owe you an apology, and I should have given it years ago." Something in her tone was different from the desperate pleading I'd heard from Marcus. She sounded tired rather than manipulative, sad rather than calculating. "I can't undo the damage I've done," Tasha continued, "but I can at least acknowledge it honestly. May I come in just for a few minutes?" I stepped aside and let her enter, but I remained standing near the door, ready to ask her to leave if the conversation went in a direction I didn't want it to go. Tasha looked around my small apartment with what seemed like genuine surprise. "I've never been here before," she said. "In 5 years of taking money from you, I never once visited your home to see how you were living." It was a small observation, but it hit me with unexpected force. She was right. They'd never come to my apartment except to ask for something. All our interactions had happened at their house or on neutral ground. They'd never shown any interest in my living situation, my comfort, my daily life. "You moved here from a bigger place, didn't you?" Tasha asked, noticing the way my furniture was crowded into the small space. "I moved here to save money," I said honestly. "Money I was giving to you and Marcus." Tasha flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I knew we were asking for a lot, but I never really thought about what it was costing you. I never connected your financial help to the choices you were making in your own life." "Why not?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Did you think I had unlimited resources?" "I think I thought you chose to live modestly," Tasha admitted, sinking into my small armchair without being invited to sit. "I thought you preferred the simple life, that you didn't care about having nice things or extra space. I never considered that you might be sacrificing your own comfort to help us." "Did you ever ask?" Tasha shook her head, tears starting to flow again. "No, I never asked about your finances, your living situation, your plans for the future. I never asked what you wanted or needed or hoped for. I just assumed that helping us made you happy, and I didn't look any deeper than that." This was different from Marcus's letter. This felt like genuine recognition rather than strategic apologizing. "The conversation you heard," Tasha continued, "the one about moving you to a senior facility, that wasn't the first time we'd discussed it. We'd been talking about it for months, maybe longer. And every time we had that conversation, we talked about what would be easier for us, what would solve our problems, what would make our lives more comfortable. We never once talked about what you might want." I sat down across from her, recognizing something in her demeanor that I hadn't seen before, actual shame rather than embarrassment at being caught. "I convinced myself that we were thinking about your best interests," Tasha said. "I told myself that you'd be happier around people your own age, that you'd enjoy the activities and social opportunities at a senior community. But the truth is, I just didn't want you living in our house permanently." "Why not?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because you would have seen too much," Tasha said quietly. "You would have seen how we really lived, how we spent money on things we wanted while asking you to pay for things we needed. You would have seen the new clothes and the restaurant meals and the weekend trips while we were telling you we were struggling financially." This was the honesty I'd been waiting for. Not apologies or promises, but actual acknowledgement of the deception that had been at the heart of our relationship. "You would have seen that we weren't really in crisis most of the time," Tasha continued, "that we could have handled our problems ourselves if we'd been willing to make different choices. You would have seen that we were asking you to sacrifice so we didn't have to." "Yes," I said simply, "I would have seen all of that." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Tasha spoke again. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I don't expect you to trust me again or welcome me back into your life. I just wanted you to know that I understand what we did to you and I'm horrified by it." "What are you going to do differently?" I asked. "We sold the dining room set," Tasha said, surprising me, "and my car. We're going to use that money to start paying you back, even though it's just a tiny fraction of what we owe you." I hadn't expected that. Marcus's letter had talked about a payment plan starting sometime in the future. This was immediate action. Marcus didn't want to, Tasha continued. He said we should wait until we were more financially stable before we started making payments, but I told him that was exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this mess in the first place. We can't get financially stable by continuing to avoid the consequences of our choices. This was the kind of recognition I'd been hoping to hear from Marcus, but hadn't seen in his letter. How much? I asked. $4,000, Tasha said. It's not much compared to what we owe you, but it's what we could raise immediately without borrowing more money or creating new problems. $4,000. It wouldn't change my financial situation significantly, but it represented something more important than money acknowledgement, that they owed me something and willingness to sacrifice their own comfort to start making amends. There's more, Tasha said. My mother is moving out. She found a senior community that she actually likes better than living with us. More activities, more social opportunities, more independence. She'll be happier there, and it will free up the room that should have been yours. I looked at her sharply. I'm not moving back into that house, Tasha. That bridge has been burned. I know, she said quickly. I'm not asking you to. I just wanted you to know that we're not making the room more comfortable for her at your expense. We're not using your money to fund her permanent exclusion of you anymore. What will you do with the room? I don't know yet, Tasha admitted. Maybe turn it into a proper guest room so you could visit comfortably if you ever wanted to. Maybe use it as an office so Marcus can take on freelance work to earn extra money for paying you back. We haven't decided because we wanted to ask what you would want us to do with it, asking what I wanted. It was such a simple concept, but it was something they'd never done before. I appreciate you asking, I said, but that house is your responsibility now. You'll have to make those decisions based on what's best for your family and your financial situation. Tasha nodded, seeming to understand that I wasn't going to step back into the role of family decision maker. There's something else, she said hesitantly. Isabella has been asking about you constantly. She doesn't understand why you stopped coming to see her, and we don't know what to tell her. This was the part I'd been dreading. Isabella was innocent in all of this, a 5-year-old who'd been caught in the middle of adult dysfunction. My heart broke every time I thought about her confusion and hurt. What have you told her so far? I asked. That you needed some space to take care of yourself and that grown-ups sometimes need time apart to figure things out, Tasha said. We haven't told her about the money or the arguments. She's too young to understand any of that. That's probably best, I agreed. But she needs to understand that the situation might not go back to the way it was before. We know, Tasha said sadly, and we know that's our fault. We know we've damaged her relationship with you along with our own. We sat quietly for a while longer. Finally, Tasha stood up to leave. The money from selling our things will be in your mailbox tomorrow, she said. Cash, so you don't have to worry about checks bouncing or any other complications. And I want you to know that we're committed to paying you back even if you never speak to us again. It's not conditional on reconciliation or forgiveness. It's just what we owe you. She walked to the door, then turned back to face me. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm sorry for taking advantage of your love. I'm sorry for treating you like a resource instead of a person. I'm sorry for all the years we wasted that could have been spent building a real relationship instead of a transactional one. After she left, I sat in my small apartment thinking about the difference between Marcus's letter and Tasha's visit. Both had contained apologies and acknowledgments of wrongdoing, but Tasha had already taken concrete action to begin making amends, while Marcus had only made promises about future behavior. The next morning, true to her word, there was an envelope in my mailbox containing $4,000 in cash and a simple note. First payment, more to follow as we're able. Thank you for everything you sacrificed for us. We didn't deserve it, but we're grateful for it. Tasha, I deposited the money into my savings account, the account that had been nearly empty for months. $4,000 wouldn't solve my financial problems, but it represented something more valuable than money, The possibility that people could change, that relationships could be repaired, that accountability was possible even after years of exploitation. But it also represented something else, proof that they could have been helping themselves all along if they'd been willing to make sacrifices. If they could raise $4,000 by selling a dining room set and a car, they could have been making regular payments to me for years instead of asking for more money. The realization was both validating and infuriating. I'd been right to suspect that many of their crises had been manufactured or exaggerated. I'd been right to believe that they'd been choosing convenience over responsibility, comfort over accountability, but I'd also been right to hope that change was possible, even if it came later than I'd wanted and at a higher cost than I'd anticipated. I spent the weekend thinking about what I wanted my future to look like. The support group had given me a framework for healing. Ruth had given me friendship without obligation, and Tasha's visit had given me hope that genuine change was possible. But I still needed to figure out what I wanted for myself apart from other people's needs and expectations. On Monday morning, I did something I'd never done before I went to see a financial planner. The meeting had been Ruth's idea. You need to know exactly where you stand financially, she'd said. You need to understand your options and make plans based on reality, not wishful thinking or other people's promises. The financial planner, a woman named Jennifer who specialized in working with older adults, reviewed my situation with professional objectivity. Let's look at what you have, she said, spreading papers across her desk. Social Security, the small pension from your late husband's job, the $4,000 you just deposited, and whatever other savings you might have accumulated. The numbers were sobering, but not hopeless. With careful budgeting and some lifestyle adjustments, I could maintain my independence and security. I wouldn't be wealthy, but I wouldn't be destitute either. What about the money your son owes you? Jennifer asked. Are you counting on that for your financial planning? I'm not counting on it, I said honestly. If it comes, it will be a bonus, but I need to plan as if it won't. Jennifer nodded approvingly. That's wise. Hope for the best, but plan for the reality you can control. We spent 2 hours developing a financial plan that would allow me to live comfortably within my means. It required some sacrifices. I'd need to be more careful about discretionary spending, and I'd need to find less expensive housing eventually. But it was doable. More importantly, it was mine. Every decision was based on my needs, my preferences, my priorities. For the first time in years, I was planning a life that belonged entirely to me. That evening, Marcus called, not to ask for anything, not to apologize again, but just to check in. Hi, Mom, he said when I answered the phone. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I know you said you needed space, but I wanted to see how you're doing. His voice sounded different, less desperate, less calculated, more like the son I remembered from before the financial manipulation began. I'm doing well, I said, surprised to realize it was true. I'm figuring some things out. That's good, Marcus said. I'm glad. You deserve to be well. We talked for a few minutes about safe topics. The weather, a book I was reading, Isabella's Progress in Kindergarten. It felt almost normal, like the kind of conversation we might have had if money had never become a factor in our relationship. Mom, Marcus said as the call was winding down, I wanted you to know that I got a second job, stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. It's not glamorous, but it's extra income that we can use to pay you back faster. A second job, actual sacrifice to make amends, rather than just promises about future behavior. I'm glad to hear that, I said and meant it. I also wanted to tell you that Tasha and I are going to marriage counseling, Marcus continued. Not because we're having problems, but because we realize that we need to learn how to make decisions together without depending on other people to solve our problems. Marriage counseling, to learn financial independence. It wasn't what I'd expected, but it was evidence of serious commitment to change. That sounds like a good idea, I said. I love you, Mom, Marcus said before hanging up. And I'm going to keep proving that with actions, not just words. After we hung up, I realized that for the first time in months, a conversation with my son had left me feeling hopeful rather than drained. Change was possible, healing was possible, but it had to be earned through consistent behavior over time, not granted based on apologies and promises alone. I was finally learning the difference between love and enabling, between helping and hurting, between being needed and being valued. And I was discovering that the second version of everything felt much better than the first. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened steadily, like watching a garden grow after years of drought. Over the next 6 months, I watched my life reshape itself around choices I made for myself rather than reactions to other people's needs. The support group became my anchor. Every Thursday evening, I sat in that circle of folding chairs with women who understood the particular challenge of rebuilding your identity after decades of defining yourself through service to others. We celebrated small victories, saying no without guilt, spending money on ourselves without justification, making plans that prioritized our own happiness. I bought myself flowers yesterday, Margaret announced one Thursday in November, her voice filled with wonder as if she'd discovered something miraculous. Not for any special occasion, not because they were on sale, just because I wanted them. The group erupted in applause, and I understood why. For women who'd spent years considering their own desires last, if at all, buying flowers for yourself was an act of revolution. My own small revolution came in the form of a cooking class. I'd seen the advertisement in the community center newsletter on Italian cooking for beginners, and for the first time in years, I'd signed up for something purely because it sounded fun. The instructor was a cheerful woman in her 60s named Maria, who treated cooking like an art form and every student like a beloved grandchild. The other students ranged from young professionals trying to impress dates to retirees looking for new hobbies. Everyone was there by choice for their own reasons, with no agenda beyond learning something they wanted to know. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in years. Cooking is love, Maria said during our third class, watching me struggle with homemade pasta. But first you must love yourself enough to feed yourself well. The comment hit me harder than it should have. When was the last time I'd fed myself well, really well, with attention and care and good ingredients? I'd been eating generic cereal and canned soup for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to nourish myself properly. That night, I went home and cooked myself the pasta dish we'd learned in class. I set the table with my good china, dishes that had been sitting in the cabinet for years, save for special occasions that never seemed to come. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was just me in my small apartment eating a simple meal, but it felt like the most luxurious dinner party I'd ever attended. The next morning, I found another envelope from Tasha in my mailbox. This time it contained $800 and a note. Second payment. Marcus's overtime from his second job. We're making progress. $800 wasn't much compared to the total they owed me, but it represented something more significant than money. It represented consistency, follow-through, sacrifice on their part rather than mine. Most importantly, it came with no strings attached, no requests for gratitude or reconciliation, no expectation that payment would buy them forgiveness. I was depositing the money at the bank when I ran into Mrs. Henderson from down the hall in my apartment building. We'd exchanged pleasantries occasionally, but had never really talked. Today she seemed determined to change that. "Evelyn, isn't it?" she said, catching up with me outside the bank. "I've been meaning to ask. Would you like to join me for lunch sometime? There's a lovely little cafe near the park that I've been wanting to try." A social invitation from someone who didn't need anything from me. When was the last time that had happened? "I'd love to," I heard myself saying. "When were you thinking? How about tomorrow around noon?" The next day, I found myself sitting across from Mrs. Henderson. "Call me Helen, po," she insisted. In a bright cafe with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Helen was 78, a widow of 10 years, and full of stories about traveling the world with her late husband. After Robert died, she told me over chicken salad sandwiches, everyone expected me to just fade away quietly, sell the house, move somewhere smaller, spend my days knitting and watching game shows. But I decided I'd spent 50 years being half of a couple. It was time to find out who I was as just me. What did you find out? I asked, genuinely curious. Helen's eyes lit up. I found out that I love adventure. I've taken a photography class, joined a hiking group, even went on a singles cruise to Alaska last year. At 78, my children think I've lost my mind, but I've never been happier. A singles cruise at 78. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. It's never too late to discover who you really are, Helen continued. Most of us spend so many years being what other people need us to be that we forget we have our own dreams and desires. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in my adult life. I went shopping for myself. Not for necessities, not for gifts for other people, but for something I wanted purely because I wanted it. I found myself in a bookstore wandering through the aisles like a tourist in a foreign country. When had I last bought a book for pleasure? When had I last read something just because it interested me without worrying about the time I was wasting that could have been spent helping someone else? I left with 3 novels, a cookbook, and a travel guide to Ireland, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had never seriously considered because there were always more practical uses for money. Ireland. The idea took root in my mind like a seed in fertile soil. That evening I called Ruth to tell her about my lunch with Helen and my spontaneous book-buying adventure. "You sound different," Ruth observed. "Lighter, happier." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm remembering who I was before I became so focused on being who everyone else needed me to be." "It's wonderful to hear," Ruth said. "You've been carrying the weight of everyone else's problems for so long I was worried you'd forgotten how to put it down." The weight, that was exactly what it had felt like. Carrying invisible burdens that got heavier every year until I could barely stand upright under their pressure. Now slowly I was setting those burdens down and discovering that I could stand perfectly well without them. In December, Marcus called with an update that surprised me. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that we're moving," he said. "We found a smaller house in a less expensive neighborhood. The mortgage payment will be almost $400 less per month, which means we can pay you back faster." They were downsizing, voluntarily, without anyone forcing them to or threatening foreclosure. They were making a significant sacrifice to their lifestyle in order to meet their obligations to me. "That must be a difficult decision," I said, recognizing the magnitude of what he was telling me. "It is," Marcus admitted. "Isabella's upset about changing schools, and Tasha's worried about the commute to her job. But we realize that we've been living in a house we could only afford because you were subsidizing our life. It's time we learned to live within our actual means." Living within their actual means. Such a simple concept, but one that had eluded them for years. "I'm proud of you for making that choice," I said, and realized I meant it. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "We wanted to ask if you'd like to have Christmas dinner with us this year, in the new house once we're settled, not because we need anything from you, not as part of any negotiation or expectation, just because we miss you and Isabella misses her grandmother." The invitation hung in the air between us. Christmas dinner with the family that had used me for years in the house they were moving to because they could no longer afford the one I'd helped them buy. 6 months ago, the invitation would have felt like manipulation. Now it felt like something else entirely. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," Marcus said immediately. "No pressure, no expectations. The invitation is open if you want it, and we'll understand if you don't." After we hung up, I realized that the conversation had felt genuinely comfortable for the first time in years. There had been no underlying tension, no sense that Marcus was working up to asking for something, no feeling that I needed to be on guard against emotional manipulation. Maybe people really could change. The next week brought another payment, this time $1,000, along with a note from Marcus. Proceeds from selling my golf clubs and other equipment I didn't really need. Funny how many necessities turn out to be luxuries when you're actually paying attention to your budget. Golf clubs. Marcus had been playing golf regularly while asking me to help with grocery money. The irony would have been infuriating 6 months ago. Now it just felt like evidence that he was finally connecting his choices with their consequences. 2 days before Christmas, I made my decision about dinner. I called Marcus and accepted the invitation, but with conditions. I'll come for dinner, I said, but I want it to be clear that this doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was before. I'm not resuming my role as the family ATM, and I'm not available for crisis management. This is just a holiday dinner between people who are learning to be family in a healthier way. Understood completely, Marcus said. Thank you for giving us the chance to show you how much we've changed. Christmas dinner was held in their new house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood of similar homes. The house was smaller than their previous one with older appliances and fewer upgrades, but it felt warmer somehow, more like a home that belonged to people who appreciated what they had rather than people who were constantly reaching for more. Isabella greeted me at the door with the enthusiasm of a 5-year-old who'd been separated from her beloved grandmother for too long. She'd grown taller in the months since I'd seen her, and she chattered excitedly about her new school and her new bedroom and the friends she'd made in the neighborhood. "Grandma, look what Daddy made me," she said, pulling me toward a corner of the living room where Marcus had built her a dollhouse from scratch. It wasn't as elaborate as the expensive one I'd bought for her birthday, but it was clearly made with love and attention to detail. "Daddy made this himself," Isabella continued proudly. "He said it's more special because he made it just for me." Marcus appeared beside us, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've been learning woodworking," he explained. "Started as a way to save money on furniture, but I discovered I actually enjoy it. There's something satisfying about building things with your own hands instead of just buying them. Building instead of buying, creating instead of consuming. These were new concepts for Marcus, and I could see how they'd changed him. There was a calmness about him that hadn't been there before, a sense of pride that came from accomplishment rather than acquisition. Tasha had changed too. She seemed more grounded, less anxious, more present in conversations, instead of constantly calculating what she needed from other people. When she showed me around the house, she pointed out the features they loved rather than the compromises they'd made. "The kitchen's smaller than our old one," she said, "but I like it better. Everything's within reach, and there's a window over the sink that looks out at the garden. I never really looked out the window in our old kitchen. I was always too busy worrying about how we were going to pay for everything. Dinner was a simple affair: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade rolls. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but everything was prepared with care and attention. We sat around the kitchen table instead of the formal dining room because, as Tasha explained with a laugh, we sold the dining room furniture, remember? The conversation flowed naturally, focused on present experiences rather than future needs or past grievances. Isabella told me about her art class and her best friend Emma. Marcus talked about his woodworking projects and his plans to maybe start selling some pieces at craft fairs. Tasha shared stories from her job and her excitement about a promotion she was being considered for. Nobody asked me for anything. Nobody hinted at financial difficulties or upcoming expenses. Nobody treated me like a solution to their problems. For the first time in years, I felt like a guest rather than a resource. After dinner, while Isabella played with her new dollhouse and Tasha cleaned up in the kitchen, Marcus and I sat on the small back porch with cups of coffee. "I owe you more than money," Marcus said quietly, watching Isabella through the window. "I owe you an apology for all the years I forgot that you were a person with your own needs and dreams." "You've been apologizing for months," I pointed out. "I've been saying the words," Marcus corrected, "but I don't think I really understood what I was apologizing for until recently. I thought I was sorry for taking your money, but I'm really sorry for taking your dignity." "Taking my dignity." The phrase hit me with unexpected power because it was so accurate. The money had been painful, but the loss of respect, the reduction of my worth to my usefulness, the erasure of my needs in favor of everyone else's wants, that had been the real damage. How do you understand it now? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. When we had to sell the furniture and move to a smaller house, I felt embarrassed. He said finally, I felt like people would judge us for downgrading, for not being able to maintain the lifestyle we'd had before. And then I realized that's probably how you felt every time you had to cut back on your own life to help us maintain ours. Except I never complained, I said. Except you never complained, Marcus agreed. You just quietly made yourself smaller and smaller so we could stay comfortable. And instead of being grateful, instead of noticing your sacrifice, we just accepted it as if it was our due. He turned to look at me directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mom. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what we took from you, and I'm committed to making sure it never happens again. The conversation we'd had 6 months ago when he'd asked me to tell him how to make things right had been about him managing my expectations. This conversation was about him understanding my experience. The difference was profound. There's something I want to show you, Marcus said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. We're not giving this to you tonight because we didn't want you to think dinner was conditional on your reaction to it, but I wanted you to know it exists. Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $15,000. How? I asked, stunned by the amount. We sold Tasha's car and bought a used one instead, Marcus explained. We used the money from selling the old house to pay off our credit cards completely, which freed up the monthly payments to put toward what we owe you. We canceled our cable and our gym memberships and our subscription services. We started shopping at discount grocery stores and buying generic brands. We stopped eating out except for special occasions. $15,000. They'd raised $15,000 in 6 months by making the kinds of sacrifices I'd been making for years to help them avoid making. We're not done, Marcus continued. We still owe you more than $30,000, but we wanted you to see that we're serious about this, that we're willing to change our entire lifestyle to make things right with you. I looked at the check, this tangible proof of their commitment to repairing the damage they'd done. 6 months ago, I would have been thrilled by the money. Now I was more moved by what it represented: genuine accountability, real sacrifice, lasting change in their priorities and values. Keep it for now, I said, handing the envelope back to him. Marcus looked confused. Keep it. Mom, this is yours. We owe it to you. I know you do, I said, but I also know that you've made real changes in your life to raise this money, and I want to see those changes continue for a while longer before we settle the financial debt between us. I don't understand. I stood up and looked out at the small backyard where Isabella was now playing with a neighbor's dog, her laughter carrying on the winter air. Money was never really the issue, Marcus, I said. Money was the symptom. The issue was that you stopped seeing me as a person who mattered for reasons other than what I could provide. You've spent the last 6 months proving that you can change that pattern. I want to see that the change is permanent before we close this chapter completely. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. You want to know that we value you for who you are, not just feel guilty about what we took from you. Something like that. We went back inside where Tasha had made hot chocolate and Isabella was setting up an elaborate tea party with her new dollhouse furniture. The rest of the evening passed peacefully, filled with the kind of ordinary family moments I'd been longing for during all the years when every interaction was colored by financial crisis. When it was time to leave, Isabella hugged me tightly and made me promise to come visit again soon. I missed you so much, Grandma, she whispered in my ear. I'm glad you're back. I missed you too, sweetheart, I whispered back and realized it was true. Despite everything that had happened with her parents, my love for Isabella had never wavered. Marcus walked me to my car carrying the leftover pie Tasha had insisted I take home. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, "and thank you for giving us the chance to prove we've changed." "You've made a good start," I said honestly, "but change is a process, not an event. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll see where it leads." Driving home through the quiet streets, I reflected on how different this Christmas had been from the ones in recent years. No financial stress, no emotional manipulation, no feeling that my presence was valued primarily for what I might contribute to someone else's happiness. Instead, I'd experienced something I'd almost forgotten existed: unconditional welcome. I'd been invited not because I was needed to solve a problem or provide a service, but because I was wanted for who I was. The new year brought new developments. In January, I received a letter from a lawyer representing Gloria Tasha's mother. Apparently, she'd been telling people that I'd forced her out of Marcus and Tasha's house, and she was considering a lawsuit for emotional distress. The letter might have panicked me 6 months earlier. Now it just made me angry. I called the lawyer directly. "This is Evelyn Morrison's," I said when he answered. "I received your letter regarding Gloria Martinez's complaint against me." "Yes, Mrs. Morrison," the lawyer said in a tone that suggested he was used to intimidating elderly women into settlements they couldn't afford. "My client has suffered considerable distress due to your interference in her living situation." "Her living situation in the room that was promised to me in the house I helped purchase?" I asked calmly, silence on the other end of the line. "I have documentation of every financial contribution I made to that household over 5 years." I continued. "I have records of promises made regarding my living arrangements and proof that those promises were broken. I also have witnesses who heard conversations about permanently excluding me from the house while making Gloria's stay permanent. If your client wants to pursue this matter, I'm happy to countersue for financial elder abuse and breach of contract." "Mrs. Morrison," the lawyer said, his tone considerably less confident, "perhaps we could work out some kind of arrangement. The arrangement is that your client stops making false accusations about me, and I don't pursue legal action against her for living rent-free in accommodations that were purchased with my money," I said firmly. "I think that's more than fair." The lawyer hung up, and I never heard from him again. Gloria's threatened lawsuit disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with a newfound understanding of my own power when I chose to use it. In February, Helen invited me to join her hiking group. "We're just a bunch of women who like to walk in pretty places and talk about whatever's on our minds," she explained. "Nothing too strenuous, but enough to get the blood flowing and remind us that we're still alive." I'd never been hiking in my life, but I bought proper shoes and joined the group for a winter walk through a state park I'd driven past hundreds of times without stopping. The other women, ranging in age from 50-something to mid-80s, welcomed me with the easy camaraderie of people who'd learned that friendship was about shared experiences rather than shared obligations. We walked for 2 hours through bare trees and frozen streams, talking about books and politics and travel dreams and the small victories of daily life. Nobody asked me for advice or help or money. Nobody needed me to be anything other than present and engaged. It was the most relaxing morning I'd had in years. "You should come with us to Ireland this summer," Helen said as we walked back to our cars. "I'm organizing a small group trip, nothing fancy, just women who want to explore and have adventures." Ireland. The travel guide I'd bought months earlier was still sitting on my bedside table, bookmarked at pages describing small villages and coastal walks and ancient castles. "I'll think about it," I said, but part of me was already planning what I'd pack. March brought the largest payment yet from Marcus and Tasha, $25,000 raised by selling their second car, and Marcus taking on additional freelance carpentry work. This time the money came with a different kind of note. "We know this doesn't make up for everything we took from you, financial and otherwise, but we wanted you to know that every sacrifice we've made to raise this money has taught us something about the sacrifices you made for us. We're grateful for your patience while we learn to be better." Love, Marcus and Tasha. The note was signed by both of them, and it felt like a milestone. Not because of the money, but because of the recognition it represented. They weren't just paying back a debt anymore, they were acknowledging a relationship that had been damaged and was slowly being repaired. I deposited the check and did something I'd never done before in my adult life. I called a travel agent. "I'd like to book a trip to Ireland," I said. 2 weeks sometime in late spring or early summer. Nothing too fancy, just a chance to see the country and maybe do some walking. The travel agent, an enthusiastic young woman named Sarah, spent an hour helping me plan an itinerary that included small bed and breakfasts, guided tours of historic sites, and plenty of free time to explore at my own pace. "This sounds like it's going to be an amazing adventure," Sarah said as we finalized the details. "Is this a special occasion?" I thought about the question. Was it a special occasion, the first time I'd ever traveled alone for pleasure, the first time I'd spent money on myself without calculating what it meant for everyone else's budget, the first time I'd planned something purely because it would make me happy? "Yes," I said finally. "It's a very special occasion." In April, I attended Isabella's spring school concert. Marcus had called to invite me, mentioning casually that they'd appreciate my presence, but understood if I couldn't make it. No pressure, no guilt, no implication that my attendance was expected or required. I sat in the elementary school auditorium surrounded by proud parents and grandparents, watching Isabella sing "This Land Is Your Land" with her kindergarten class. She spotted me in the audience and waved enthusiastically, nearly missing her cue to begin the next verse. After the concert, Isabella ran to me with excitement bubbling over. "Grandma, did you hear me singing? Did you see me remember all the words? I heard every note," I told her, hugging her tightly. "You were wonderful." Marcus and Tasha approached more cautiously, still uncertain about the boundaries of our rebuilt relationship. "Thank you for coming, Tasha said. "It meant a lot to Isabella to have you here." "It meant a lot to me too," I replied honestly. We went for ice cream afterward, a simple family outing that felt remarkable for its ordinariness. No one needed anything from me except my presence. No one was managing me toward a particular outcome. We were just people who cared about each other, celebrating a little girl's accomplishment. On the drive home, I realized that this was what I'd been hoping for all along: not to be needed, but to be wanted, not to be useful, but to be valued, not to solve problems, but to share joy. The difference between those things had taken me 73 years to understand, but I'd finally learned it. In May, I received a graduation announcement in the mail. Marcus had completed a certification program in furniture making and small business management. He was planning to start his own carpentry business specializing in custom furniture and home improvements. "I wanted you to be the first to know," he wrote in a note attached to the announcement. "This whole experience of learning to be self-sufficient has taught me that I actually enjoy working with my hands and creating things. Who knew? Thank you for forcing me to discover what I was capable of when I stopped depending on other people to solve my problems." Forcing him to discover his capabilities. I'd never thought of my decision to stop enabling him as a gift, but perhaps that's what it had been. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to step out of their way and let them learn to stand on their own. 3 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Ireland with Helen and 4 other women from our hiking group. It was my first time flying in over 20 years, my first time traveling without Harold, my first time planning an adventure that belonged entirely to me. Dublin was green and gray and full of music spilling out of pubs onto cobblestone streets. The countryside was dotted with sheep and stone walls and ruins that had been standing for centuries before my country was even discovered. The people were warm and welcoming, full of stories and laughter, and the kind of easy hospitality that made strangers feel like friends. I walked along coastal cliffs and through ancient castle grounds. I drank tea in tiny villages and listened to traditional music in crowded pubs. I bought souvenirs that I wanted, ate meals that delighted me, and took pictures of things that caught my fancy. Most importantly, I spent 2 weeks making decisions based entirely on what would make me happy in that moment. No one else's needs to consider, no one else's schedule to accommodate, no one else's budget to worry about. It was the most liberating experience of my adult life. On my last day in Ireland, I sat in a pub in a village so small it barely appeared on the map, writing postcards to the people I'd left behind. One to Ruth, one to the women in my support group, one to Dorothy at the diner, who'd first suggested I might be worth investing in, and one to Marcus and Tasha and Isabella. Having the most wonderful time, I wrote in my careful script. Ireland is everything I dreamed it would be and more. Thank you for giving me the gift of learning to live for myself. I never knew how much joy was possible until I started choosing it. Love to all. See you soon. The postcard was a small thing, but it represented something enormous proof that I'd finally learned to be happy on my own terms, with my own resources, for my own reasons. When I got home from Ireland, there was another envelope waiting for me. This one contained a key and a note that read, "Emergency key to our new house. Not because we expect you to solve our emergencies, but because you're family, and family should always have a way home. Use it any time you want to visit, or just because you need a place to belong. We love you, MT and I." A key to their house, not as a caretaker or a resource or a solution to their problems, but as a beloved family member who was always welcome. I hung the key on my kitchen wall next to the photos from my trip to Ireland and the certificate from my Italian cooking class and the card from Helen's hiking group announcing our next adventure, all evidence of a life that finally truly belonged to me. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, I woke up in my small apartment and realized something remarkable. I was genuinely happy. Not happy because someone else was happy, not happy because I'd solved someone's problem or met someone's need, but happy because I'd built a life that reflected my own values, interests, and dreams. The phone rang as I was making coffee. It was Marcus calling with his weekly check-in. "Good morning, Mom," he said, and his voice was warm with genuine affection rather than calculating need. "How are you doing?" "I'm doing wonderfully," I said, and realized it was completely true. We talked for 20 minutes about his growing carpentry business, Isabella's progress in first grade, Tasha's promotion at work, and my plans for the day. It was an easy, comfortable conversation between people who cared about each other without needing anything from each other. "I love you, Mom," Marcus said before hanging up. "I love you too," I replied, and for the first time in years, the words carried no weight beyond their simple truth. After breakfast, I opened my laptop and began planning my next adventure. Helen had suggested a trip to Tuscany in the spring, and I was researching cooking schools and small hotels in hill towns with names like poetry. At 74 years old, I was finally learning to live for myself, and it turned out that the life I built for myself had room for everyone I truly cared about, not as obligations or projects or sources of purpose, but as genuine relationships based on mutual respect and affection. The $48,300 had been paid back in full over the course of 2 years. But more importantly, I'd been paid back something more valuable, my dignity, my self-respect, and my understanding of my own worth. I'd learned that family isn't about who shares your blood or who needs your money. Family is about who shows up for you when there's nothing to gain, who values your happiness alongside their own, who sees you as a person rather than a resource. And I'd learned that it's never too late to start over, to set boundaries, to choose yourself, to build a life that brings you joy rather than just bringing others convenience. The woman who'd sat at a kitchen table signing closing papers while her son planned her exile was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more free. Someone who'd finally learned the difference between being needed and being loved, and that it turned out made all the difference in the world.